Appalachia. You've heard it, we've seen the reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountaintop to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks who live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley. I was born and raised in these very mountains. A family who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that come from within my beloved mountains. And we'll look through the eyes of an old Appalachian and some outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. Now, just north of Nashville area, if Tennessee sits Sumter County. Now, if you've ever been there, you'd know that it's about as peaceful as it is beautiful. It's the last place on earth that you'd think somebody would carry out one of the worst mass murders in the state of Tennessee's history. But that's exactly what happened back in 2019. A man was charged with 8 murders, including 6 of his own family members. Weren't nobody safe around this piece of dog squeeze. Now, police officers that worked the scenes would call it one of the most horrific crime sprees that they'd ever seen. So, come on in, take your shoes off, and set a spell while I tell you one of the things that happened not too long ago in Tennessee. Now, Michael Lee Cummins was a bit of a problem where he lived. He lived in Sumter County, Tennessee, and that's just south of the Kentucky border and just a bit outside the town of Westmoreland. Now, outside Westmoreland, we can get you a picture of that one too. If you're watching this on video. Now, neighbors and local cops were pretty familiar with Mr. Cummins. Where I come from, my grandma would say he was a holy terror. In a town of 2,700 residents with about 800 houses, almost everybody knew each other, and they knew that Michael Cummins was a standout performer in the criminal arts, and he wasn't very good at any of it because he ended up downtown getting his obligatory slap on the wrist about every time that he did something, not to mention his odd behavior, which, as if committing crimes right out in broad daylight didn't get the attention of the police, that sure did. Now, in 2019, 25-year-old Michael Cummins, let me see here, picture of that boy. He lived in Charles Brown Road with his parents, Clara and David, and extended family members. Like often happens in the Appalachian Mountains, sometimes folks need a hand up, and that's when friends and family offer one. Now, the Cummins family was on a big lot outside of town. Neighbors and town folk would have reported Michael as the town's a-hole in general for about as long as he'd been breathing. Local folks say that he flat out terrorized neighborhoods constantly as a thief. Most of the time, and not no small time stuff either. They say he stole 4-wheelers, lawnmowers, anything he could get his hands on. Michael grew up in that area and graduated from Westmoreland High School. He and his daughter from a previous relationship, and after he split with his mother and the kid's mother, he rarely ever saw his child anymore. It was common thought that among local folks that Michael was a troubled individual. He was assumed that he had issues with his mental health, but nobody knew whether he had been diagnosed with anything or not. Like in all small towns, hearsay was a pastime that folks might have dabbled in just a bit, but for the most part, they minded their own business. But with all the break-ins and thriving that he did, he stayed in the topic of conversation most of the time. That wasn't all. Now, he had drug violations and protective orders filed against him, in his late teens and early 20s. And in 2012, he was found with a 17-year-old girl with whom he had been ordered to have no contact. Now, he was cited for drug possession during that arrest as well. And then there was the fact that Michael Lee's temper would explode at the drop of a hat, and he would insist on you dropping the hat. Neighbors and his own family members had been on the receiving end of that one once or twice themselves. Now, anything that he thought might even look like a slight towards him, and he was turned on and went right wide open. Most of the time, nobody even knew what set him off, but he would go on a tirade anyway. Now, the whole thing was escalated over time and to a level that after one of his arrests, he was ordered to undergo a mental evaluation. And so in the summer of 2013, his aunt called the police for help. Michael said that he got so mad that he blacked out in anger after he just thought that his aunt might have accused him of stealing something. According to the police report, he started throwing things and tearing stuff up all over the house, and he was arrested. After the charge was reduced to simple assault, he was ordered to serve 150 days in jail. Now, in February of 2017, he was arrested for stealing from a neighbor's house. He was charged with theft and pled guilty and got no jail time. Now, instead of that, he was placed on supervised probation and again ordered to complete a mental health treatment. A few months later, he was arrested again. This time, his mother called the police after he came home and demanded that she give him some money. When he heard that awful offensive word no, he just started helping himself to whatever items he wanted around the house. Now, he wasn't even living with his parents then, and they had a protective order against him. Now, the reason I think that was because that the police report stated that he was in his mother's house, where he wasn't supposed to be anymore. When they refused to give him money, he got mad again. Well, I tell you what, ain't that something? His grandmother was there for that one and tried to calm the situation down, but he attacked her too. So he was arrested and charged with domestic assault to go along with the robbery. He pleaded guilty to the charges and was ordered to attend domestic violence classes and not to have any contact with his grandmother anymore. He served a long, drawn-out 2 months in jail, and now I have read where folks in the field of psychology have said that he had a mental state that drove his reactions to other people. Now, I say then what makes the lunatic go steal from other people to start with? I know that the field of psychology is still very young and compared to the physical medicine, and there's a whole lot left to learn about it. But I'm of the belief that what happens to be a lack of accountability probably for what he's done is more what I see here. 150 days here, 2 months there, most people can do that standing on their head. He needed more than a slap on the wrist to get his attention. I'm far from a psychologist, but sometimes you don't need to be one and to have an opinion, and I have one. In early 2017, Michael was arrested several more times and either served probation or was handed a short sentence that required to receive a mental health treatment. Another condition of his probation was that he be required to complete classes to help him better deal with stress, including domestic violence prevention and anger management. That'll learn him. Maybe that he responded so well to the rest of it, I guess, he'll respond well to this one. Of course, per usual, Michael ignored all of that and didn't do most of the stipulations, and by the time he was in his early 20s, that's when, according to the psychologist, his mental health began to decline. I don't know how much further it needed to go, but folks, I'm no expert in law either, but the fact is that the government had heaped on opportunity to do something about the wackadoodle and just did most of what most government does. They wrote something on a piece of paper and passed it buck. Now, that allowed the monster back out on to do what monsters do, which is continue to terrorize along with stepping up things a notch or 12. Now, Michael of course, was released after serving 2 months in jail for the attack on his grandmother. A couple of weeks later, he attacked a neighbor. Michael was said to be walking around the neighborhood, yelling out like a mad dog. Apparently, the nutball was mad at a neighbor for God in heaven only knows what this time. Not like it mattered anyway, I guess, but on September 13th, 2017, a woman was in her home just a block down from where the Cummins family lived, and she smelled smoke and went outside to see what was burning, and she found that her house was on fire. So she tried to put it out before it got out of hand. That's when Moonbat Cummins stepped out of nowhere, shoved her in the ground, and began pulling her hair out by the roots. This time, the lunatic tried to burn her house down by shoving stuff like old newspapers between the subflooring and the insulation in the house and lighting it up. Luckily, he failed in that attempt. Again, he was pounced on, arrested, and dragged downtown. Now, this time, he was charged with aggravated arson and ended up sentenced to 10 years in prison. The whole time he was screaming and yelling right in the courtroom that he would finish the job once he got out. Now, it would look like somebody finally put teeth on the government and all that paperwork, and he's going to have to do some time to start thinking about things. Off he goes to prison, and within a year, he's given probation hearing, and that's where the bureaucrats at the parole board figured that he did have a mental health condition, so he was allowed to plead guilty to aggravated assault and attempted arson and was resentenced to 10 years probation. Since all of that government paperwork has worked so well in the past and all, I guess they figured they may as well just do it again. So, which meant that in January of 2019, and with stipulations that he would have no contact with his victim and that he undergo mental health evaluation, which they apparently skipped while making their parole decision, he danced out the front door and straight back to his old neighborhood. And just like we always say here, a wackadoodle gonna do what a wackadoodle gonna do. Now, he did something that shocked the bureaucrats who gave him probation by doing what he has done every other solitary time that he's been released in the bureaucratic programs. He stopped complying with their dadgum probation conditions. His probation officer showed up at his home in April to check on which was going on. And as usual, you're supposed to take a place, and check your home and meet with them. Michael had already made a break for it and wouldn't answer his phone calls. They waited to see if he would come by the office for his regular probation meeting, but he decided that he was going to be too cool for school and skipped that one along with the mental health evaluation that he was supposed to have done too. All that, and somebody had reported him for violating the no contact order with the neighbor whose home he'd tried to burn. Now, with all of that, they planned to arrest him and send him back to prison, but it was the policy of the Tennessee Department of Corrections that they wait 15 to 30 days before filing arrest warrants on probation violators, which wouldn't have been a problem if he hadn't been let out in the first place, would it? A great man once said, "What did you think was going to happen?" Now, on April 26, they finally issued a warrant for his arrest, and that's about the time that he showed up at his uncle's house, which was about a mile from the family's home, looking like he'd just been on a 10-day crack bender. Now, he looked like somebody had shot clothes right out of a cannon, and they just happened to land on him, and that's the way he wore them. Now, he was even wearing girls' shoes. He borrowed another pair of shoes from his cousin Dwayne and left the ones that he was wearing there. The next evening, at about 5:30, the police responded to a 911 call from Charles Brown Road. Carlotta Clenard and her fiance, Timothy Meadows, had traveled to Clara and David Cummins' house after they couldn't contact her mother. Nanny Carlotta was Clara Cummins' sister and Michael Cummins' aunt. Now, Mary Hossel was known as Nanny. She's the one that lived there that he had attacked, as did Charles Hossel. Now, Carlotta and Clara's brother, Charles, girlfriend Rachel, and Rachel's 12-year-old daughter, Sapphire, stayed there too. Now, Carlotta hadn't heard anything from her mother for a couple of days and nobody was answering the phone. She and Tim decided to make sure that everything was all right, but it turned out it wasn't all right. When they got there, the house was completely silent. Now, when you got that many folks in one house, you know that ain't right. They tried to open the front door, but it was stuck. Tim pushed on it and saw that the bed had been pushed up and moved against it. Now, once they managed to get in, Carlotta walked into the front room, then turned and ran out of the house to call 911. Her fiance entered. At first, his mind couldn't comprehend what he saw, but he said it was like a bloody, horrific war scene. There were bodies laying all over the house. There was so much blood that nobody could tell if the victims had been stabbed, beaten, shot, or maybe all three. Carlotta was frantic and to find her mother, and she did. Nanny was still alive. They told 911 to get EMS there now. Nanny appeared to have been just plain beat. Her injuries were so horrible that Carlotta couldn't hardly even recognize her if she didn't know who she was. Now, at 7:10 that evening, officers from Tennessee Bureau of Investigations reported finding 6 bodies in the home. Now, the victims would be identified as members of Michael Lee Cummins' family. His mother, Clara Cummins, age 44, his father, David Cummins, age 51, his uncle, Charles Hosiel, age 45, Michael's girlfriend, or Charles' girlfriend, Rachel McLaughlin, 43, and Rachel's daughter, Sapphire McLaughlin, 12. And I think I may have a picture of them here. Yes, I do. Let's see. Yes, I do. You can see them there. Um, now, Rachel's mother, yes, she was the one known as Nana. She was 64. And, Marcia Knuckles was 64, and his grandmother, Mary Sue Hustle, the only person at the home that survived the attack, was the one known as Nanny. It was one of the most complex and gruesome crime scenes they had ever seen. District Attorney Ray Whitley said that it was one of the most horrific cases that he'd ever had to deal with in his 40-year law career. Evidence at the scene led to the investigators to think that 25-year-old Michael Cummins was the prime suspect. I wonder what tipped them off to that. They'd already found a headless body in a burned out cabin 10 days before, and about a mile from the scene. The head was found laying about 25 yards away from the body. It was determined that that was James Dunn. He died as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. During the investigation into Mr. Dunn's murder, it was discovered that items, including a rifle, had been taken from his house. The missing rifle was found at the Cummins house. And then, right when investigators were starting to lock down the crime scene at the Cummins place, they got another 911 call for another murder. 69-year-old Shirley Furley's body had been found at her residence, and she's the one in the top row in the middle there. You look in the picture if you're watching on video. Now, that was an eighth of a mile from where they were working their current crime scene. Her car, a black Kia Forte, was missing. Now, investigators believe her murder was connected to the other ones, too. You reckon? Michael Cummins was now at the top of the suspect list and wanted for 8 murders and 1 attempted murder. At 7:30 that evening, about 2 hours after Carlotta called 911 to report her family's death, police finally named him as a person of interest, and that kicked off a manhunt, which was done by land, sea, and air. Basically, everybody was flying all over the place, riding horses. They were riding ATVs. They had more than 100 law enforcement personnel beating the bush for the lunatic. Now, police warned that he was armed and dangerous and most likely hiding somewhere close. Residents were advised to lock their doors and windows and stay in their houses. Less than 2 hours later, they pounced on, arrested, and he was dragged downtown to the hospital to be treated for his injuries because he didn't go down too easy. Now, let's see here. We got a picture of him being dragged in here. if you happen to be watching. That's him with the sheriff there standing behind him, ready to club him on the head again if he needs it. But the idiot was found laying in a creek, lay, less than a mile from the crime scene, probably thinking he was camouflaged, I guess. When he knew they saw him, he jumped up and tried to run and was shot by the SWAT team member. Now, he was transported to the hospital with non-life threatening injuries, because these guys are probably good enough to shoot him in the leg if they so desire while he's running. Those guys that are that good, take my word for it. Now, the chief medical examiner determined that all the victims died from blunt force trauma. All had received multiple blows to the head, and some also received sharp force injuries, which investigators believe was caused by either a hatchet or an axe. Now, the other weapons was thought to be a baseball bat, probably. Now, Wackadoodle Cummins was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. His trial was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That gave him plenty of time to give him a real good mental health evaluation. The fact that he got several of them between 2019 and 2022. Now, prosecutors decided they were going to seek the death penalty this time and issue his competence to stand trial to be cleared up first, because capital sentence couldn't be administered to somebody that actually had a mental illness. Now, in June of 2022, the nutball was found fit to stand trial. Prosecutors got all readied up and to present their trial against him in 2 separate trials. On August the 16th, 2023, Michael danced into court and pled guilty to all 8 charges of first-degree murder. Of course, he did that in exchange for his the death penalty being taken off the table. Because when it comes down to dishing out death, they ain't got no trouble with it. When it bounces back on them, well, it's not easy for them to face. Yes, folks, it was a plea deal where he agreed to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. He got the big LWOP. Now, Michael was also sentenced to an additional 10 years for the attempted murder on his grandmother, Mary Sue Hussle, who died in 2022. It was reported that her health declined due to the severe injuries that she had sustained in the attack, which her family believes led to her death. And I would probably tend to agree with that. I happen to share the same sentiments as the lunatic's neighbors when they said that he tried burning his next door neighbor's house down and he was going to kill her. Now, I don't know why they would let him out after all the trouble he's been in the past, but if he was still in jail, his family would still be living and all these victims would still be living. At some point, I don't think it matters one way or another whether he was actually mentally ill or not. Let's see, we've got some more pictures here to share. That's the house where all of it happened, with a memorial in the front yard if you're watching on video. Now, at some point, like I said, I don't know if it matters one way or another whether he was actually mentally ill or not. I happen to think that he was an undisciplined nutball who was never truly held accountable for anything. So why wouldn't he keep stepping it up? Once it goes as far as he did, and nothing at all worth doing was actually done, at least in keeping him away from the innocent people anyway, then some of the blame can go on the people who kept slapping him on the wrist and letting him out. It's just about as simple as that to me. Folks, I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening or watching on Spotify, YouTube, or Rumble. And please like and share and show around or use any segment of the video that you like to use or sound that you like to use. All I ask is that you mention that it came from Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend Podcast. Come on over to Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend Podcast group on Facebook, or join us over on X, where we talk everything Appalachian or about anything else you want to bring up. And I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend. I will see you then.